Welcome to this video in which we talk about the important drivers of supply chain performance. This is the third video in a series of supply chain metrics and drivers. In this video, we'll talk about the important drivers and how you can use the metrics to measure their performance. Now, if you remember in a previous video last week, we talked about the idea of the zone of strategic fit, where we looked at how you design a supply chain, what is the best zone to have your supply chain based on the responsiveness spectrum and the implied uncertainty spectrum, right? So your supply chain can be very responsive or it can be efficient. It cannot be it can only be one or the other, and the same goes for uncertainty, both in demand and in supply. So based upon that, you have a zone of strategic fit. Assuming that we have designed our supply chain to fit in the zone of strategic fit, the supply chain drivers that we are talking about play an important role in making sure that you have, if the design is good, that your supply chain is working well. So if you remember, the efficiency to responsiveness zone of efficiency to responsiveness spectrum. Your supply chain can be anywhere on the spectrum, and these are the six main drivers that affect your supply chain structure. There are three logistical drivers and three cross-functional drivers. The three logistical drivers are facilities, inventory, and transportation. So these are the facilities that you own or you rent. Inventory that is fully converted to final product or final service or even intermediate work in process inventory, and finally transportation, right? So these are the main important logistical drivers. And then you have cross-functional drivers that are part of every decision that you make, not just as part of the supply chain, but also part of the other functions within a company, like accounting and marketing and all of those things, right? So physical locations in a supply chain, those are the facilities. Inventory or the raw materials, work in process, etc. Transportation is moving inventory from one point to another. Remember that transportation could be something that the company owns, or it could also be something that the company rents out. So it could be something that the company outsources. Now, what about the cross-functional drivers? The three important cross-functional drivers are information, sourcing, and pricing. So information includes data and analysis concerning the facilities and inventory and transportation, but also about the costs and prices and customers throughout the supply chain. Information transfer is a huge part of measuring a supply chain performance. Then you have sourcing and pricing, obviously. So who will perform a particular supply chain activity? That's important part of what sourcing is. And pricing, of course, is how much a firm will charge for the goods and services that it makes available within the supply chain. So what we'll do is we'll briefly go over each of these six metrics, and we'll talk about six drivers, and we'll talk about the metrics related to them. Right. So facilities. So what is their role in the supply chain? Their role is mainly to increase the responsiveness. The more facilities you have, the more responsive you can be. The simplest example of this is Amazon. So if Amazon opens a warehouse close to a certain place where in a certain region that they did not have warehouses before, now they can offer things like same-day delivery or two-day delivery where they were not able to offer them before. So it increases responsiveness. So that's their main role within a supply chain, right? So components of facility related metrics that you usually look at are: what is the capacity of a location, what is the utilization, how much capacity do you have, what part of it are you using, when is the facility up, when is the facility down, how many people do you have in it, if there is production cost per unit, losses, quality losses, flow times, cycle times. There are lots of different metrics that are related to facilities based upon whether you're doing production, whether you're doing storage. A lot of other things also come into play. So that's important. The other important metrics are flow time efficiency. You also have volume contribution and production service level and all of that, right? Now, many of these metrics, especially with facilities, we will look more, we look at them more deeply as we go through this course, right? Now, let's look at inventory. So the main role of inventory in supply chain is to make sure that there is no mismatch in supply and demand. It is also useful for exploiting economies of scale. What this means is that sometimes when you're ordering from your supplier, it might make sense for you to order in a larger quantities to get some discounts, quantity based discounts. And so you might have to store that. So that is inventory. So inventory is also helpful with reducing costs, improving availability, especially if you remember what happened in the pandemic, is that inventory was low. A lot of the supply chains that are set up around the world, they are very they follow something called just-in-time inventories, which is inventory is available just right at the right point in time, and there is just enough inventory to do exactly what needs to be done. But what that does is when a big shock to the system, like a pandemic happens, the whole system gets rattled. The factories have shut down, so there is not enough material there's not enough manufactured. So retail stores don't have enough. So you saw toilet paper shortages, medicine shortages, lots of other shortages, some of which we are even living through right now, right? So exploiting economies of scale, and of course making sure that you have product availability and responsiveness, obviously. Now, some of the trade-offs in inventory is if you hold a lot of inventory, you pay a lot of inventory holding cost, but at the same time, you make sure that any stresses to the system, you're more responsive to stresses within the system, right? Now, some of the inventory metrics are material flow time, throughput, the rate at which sales occur, and of course, there is something called Little's Law. We're not going to spend time on it. It just says that the flow time within a system can be calculated as the product of demand and throughput. Right? So, flow time is the time that elapses between the point at which material enters the supply chain and the point which it exists. So, it's like turnover time, but material flow time, right? Okay. So that's inventory. So these are some of the important metrics, and inventory is part of what we're going to talk about later on in the semester. So we will not talk much about cycle or safety inventories in this course, but we will talk about seasonal inventories and product availability and so on. So these are all important. Here are some of the metrics: inventory buildup, to counter predictable variability in demand, and so on. So this is something we'll talk about later on in the semester. Some of the important inventory related metrics, of course, we saw the cost to cost cycle time that we talked about in the financial metrics video. You have average inventory turnover, replenishment batch size, you have a safety inventory, fill rate, fraction of time out of stock, obsolete inventory, right? So these are some of the important metrics to do with inventory decisions. Now, transportation again, you move products between different stages. It affects the responsiveness and efficiency. So as you know, that's part of the spectrum that we're talking about. Components of transportation decisions includes designing. So what kind of transportation are you going to use? Where are the locations going to be? What kind of routes do you use? And so on. So there are many decisions that need to be made. We'll talk about a few of these in a couple of weeks, right? So when we say more, we're talking about air, truck, rail, sea, and so on. So that's important. The other thing to look at are the important transportation related metrics. You have average inbound transportation cost, shipment size, outbound shipment size, fraction transported by mode. So what fraction are you sending by air, what by rail, and what by ship, and all of that. Then of course you have the important thing to look at is the trade-off that you have in responsiveness versus efficiency with transportation. The cost of transportation of a given product and the speed at which the product is transported. So those are the two important pieces. So if efficiency is important, you reduce the cost of transportation. If responsiveness is important to your supply chain, so if you have a responsive supply chain, it is the speed at which you deliver the product that is important. Finally, let's talk about information. So information, the role of information in the supply chain is to improve utilization of the assets that you have within the supply chain, and to also allow for coordination. So if you look at in real life, when you have supply chains that are made up of multiple companies, and you're trying to manage the whole supply chain, unless you have a major partner in a supply chain that can sort of wrangle all the different players in a supply chain, it is very hard to do coordination across a supply chain. The most important thing that you can that you can give to your say your vendors and your customers is information. You can say, well, I expect my demand to be X, Y, and Z for this quarter or for this month. And if you tell that to your suppliers, then your suppliers can use that and similar information from their other customers to sort of figure out what their demand is going to be and how they can manage that. And the same goes for your customers, right? Unless they are, of course, end users. So it's very important. Information plays a very, very key role in supply chain coordination. So you have data interchange, like I said. Of course, you have enterprise resource planning, supply chain management software, RFID. That's another way of keeping track of the inventory that you have, and that's another piece of information that you usually keep track of. Now, forecasting is something that all companies have to do. We're not going to talk about forecasting in this class, but you might have seen it in, or you will see it in your operations management class, one way or the other. So what kind of horizon are you forecasting for? Is it going to be a weekly forecast, monthly forecast, and so on? Then the errors in your forecast, is there any variance from your plan? Then demand variability and all of that. So these are all important metrics that you need to keep track of when looking at information. Let's see. Right, so those are the main information-based metrics. Now let's get sourcing. So we still have to look at sourcing and pricing, and then we'll be done with the different drivers. I misspoke before. Sorry about that. Right, so sourcing. So the role of sourcing in supply chain is a set of business processes related to purchase of goods and services. How do you source something within your supply chain? So so you have to figure out, will tasks be performed internally or will it be given to a third party? Are you going to outsource this or do it internally? So that's something that you have to figure out. Now, sourcing decisions are crucial because they affect the level of efficiency and supply chain responsiveness. So if you have a very responsive supply chain, that is something where you might want to do a third party because they might be much faster. But if you're doing, that's for responsiveness. But if you're looking at efficiency, it might make sense to do it internally because doing internally tends to be cheaper, right? So that's something to keep in mind. So in-house or outsource. So again, we'll talk some of this when we look at some of the decision tree sort of methods that we do. Do we keep it in-house? Do we outsource, and so on, right? So we have to make decisions about suppliers. We have to make decisions about procurement. So procurement can be done in many ways these days. There are various methods in which procurement can be done. You can have a simple contract with the person. You can always put out a RFP, request for proposals, and have people bid and do procurement that way. So there are many ways in which procurement is done. Some of the important metrics are average purchase quantity, supply quality, supply lead time, supplier reliability. There are many important metrics in sourcing decisions. Now finally, let's talk about pricing, and then we'll end with supply chain drivers. So pricing determines the amount to charge your customers, obviously, and the objective should obviously be to increase the firm's profit, and pricing strategy should be done in such a way that you can match supply with demand. This is crucial. So economies of scale, again, remember, you can get quantity discount sometimes, so some of that affects the kind of way in which you price your products. You can have fixed price versus menu pricing. So menu pricing is something that you look at in many places. Something as simple as something in a place like Macy's, you can have menu pricing, all the way up to the variable pricing that you see with Uber, right? So that's also a method of menu pricing. So some of the important metrics are the profit margin, average sale per price, so average sale price, average order size, range of periodic sales. These are all important metrics when you're looking at pricing decisions. Now, all the metrics that we talked about, they will either be financial metrics like we looked at, or they will be productivity based metrics. A lot of these are similar. Keep that in mind. So that's it. So this is the last part of the supply chain metrics and drivers series that I'm doing for this week. The videos will be all online. Thank you. Take care.